I want to pull some, before we move past Vietnam and Hack, I want to pull some stuff out of About Face just to kind of hear your thoughts on it. I'm going to start off with one that you've talked about a little bit, but here we go. This is from About Face by David Hackworth, and this is a quote from someone else. It says, Hack had the knack of being able to size people up very quickly, almost instantaneously. And I'd say 99% of the time he was right. He could look at a person, and in his vernacular, the guy was either a stud or he wasn't. There was no in between. If he was a stud, Hack would find a way to get him. And he would not take no from people if he wanted them, because he wanted a winning team. And if a person didn't want to go with him, then immediately the guy wasn't a stud, you see, because anybody who knew Hack or came into contact with him really wanted to be with him after he'd known him for a while. And that's a quote from Brigadier General James H. Mukoyama, which is you. Yeah. You're quoted in the book. And you've talked about that a little bit. And he must have had an extremely magnetic personality for you to say that if you spent time with him, you wanted to be with him.
Oh, absolutely. And I used to say he had the Midas touch. Everything the guy touched, just whether it was in the military, whether it was in business, whether it was with women, and this guy, he was a stud himself, but he was also a sensitive guy. I'll never forget when, I tell people he wasn't the most moral guy that I knew, but he was the most ethical officer I ever served with. What I mean by that is he never did anything for personal gain. He always did things for the unit and for the soldiers, okay? But did he have affairs and things like that? Yeah, and he used to tell me, he said, Mook, I should have never married because my love is the Army. Mm-hmm. So he basically turned down the war college. He could have gone to the war college. He turned it down because he said, hey, I want another battalion in Vietnam. He would have been a general. There's no question about it. Had he not stood up, when he was in 06. I think he was the youngest 06 at that time in the Army. But he was a guy who was sensitive, though. And he did take care of his family. In fact, I can say this now because it's, I think statute of limitations might be gone, but, in those days you weren't able to take a lot of cash out of Vietnam, and I basically, one day, he knew I was going back home. Oh, and by the way, he did everything he could to convince me to extend in Vietnam. Okay. He had moved down to be the senior advisor for the Arvin Airborne Division, which was really the Palace Guard around Saigon, okay? Mm-hmm. And he knew all my hot buttons. You have to understand, I was a bachelor guy at this time, right? And the airborne, the Vietnamese airborne, wore special fatigues. They were like tiger fatigues, and they had red berets, and I'm just this young stud guy who likes uniforms. And he said, Mook, why don't you come down here and I'll make you the G1 advisor. That's the admin guy, right? And he said, but when you come down, if you're an advisor for the Vietnamese airborne, you get jump pay. So that's extra money, right? And he said, and I'll give you 2 R&Rs. You can, because he knew I wanted to go to Japan and see my relatives. So in 6 months, he said, I'll give you 2 R&Rs, right? So the guy's, he's trying to move the sun and the moon to get me to extend 6 months. And I said, sir, I appreciate it, but I had some close calls. And I figured the next one would have Mukoyama written. That bullet would have Mukoyama written on it. And I said, no thanks. I appreciate it, but I'm out of here. So I left.
You're talking about the way he was, so pro-Army, and yet he rebelled against the Army in a way. And here's another thing from the book. He says, what a mistake it was to listen to the generals of corporate HQ. who were briefed only in zero defect terms and, so far from the cutting edge, expected nothing less. It was amongst the biggest mistakes of the war. The politicians only listened to these generals, and the generals only listened to themselves. Few people asked frontline soldiers, the only ones who really knew. Could you guys, or could you, because you were pretty close to him, could you sense that his frustration with the Army? Did he talk about it with you? How did he treat, that's a very hard thing for a leader to do. If your senior leadership is telling you to do stuff that doesn't make sense, but hey, we can get it done and we're going to do it. It's a hard line to walk to say, look, we support the chain of command. This is what they're telling us to do. I'm going to spin it in a positive way. Everyone's going to think that we're doing it for the right reasons. Because if I say, hey, look, Mook, here's what I want you to do, and it's dumb, but we're getting told to do it anyways, that's not a good way to lead.
No, he wouldn't say that.
So he would support the chain and
yeah, he would present it in the way in which, he would talk about the mission. And he would make sure that he would accomplish the mission, but he would do it his way. The phrase battlefield expediency. That's what we did all the time. Screw it. What are they going to do? Send us to Vietnam? We're already there. So we just did what we had to do. Mm-hmm. And, the stupid rules of engagement that we had, where you'd have to get approval to fire on people even though you're receiving fire, and just nutty stuff,
right?
And we just say, hey, we're going to do what we have to do, and that's what we did.
Mm-hmm. Here's when he took over the battalion. The following day, I took over the battalion from Lieutenant Colonel Franklin A. Hart in a parade field exchange of command in the middle of the Mekong Delta. What kind of war have I gotten myself into, I wondered. A perfectly starched General Ewell was there, having flown in for the occasion in his polished choppers. There was other brass too, and photographers, the American flag, the battalion colors, which were ceremoniously passed on to me, and all of this before the scroungiest, most spiritless assembly of soldiers I'd ever seen. Incredibly, none of the generals or colonels seemed to notice the slack condition of my new charges or their positions. From the outset, I realized that to make this unit an effective military force, I'd have to implement about 1,000 changes. So I figured we'd start with 5 a day, little things, basic things like wear your steel pot and clean and carry your rifle at all times, and ammunition will not be worn Pancho Villa style. My first order was that come darkness, the fire support base perimeter would pull back 300 meters. The troops instantly began to grumble about this. But it was the next order that really began the mutinous feeling within my hard luck outfit. Anything you can't carry 24 hours a day is gone in the next chopper. Goodbye tents and cots and rucksacks and food lockers. The bitching and moaning began in earnest as piles and piles of junk mounted at the LZ to be whisked away by Chinook. But I didn't care. I wasn't there to have them like me. Again, we already talked about this, and this comes up a lot from a leadership perspective. Is it more important to be liked, or is it more important to be respected? Is it more important to, and I actually had a guy ask me this question the other day, is it more important to win or to be liked? And I said, well, those two things aren't mutually exclusive at all.
You're right. You're absolutely correct. They're not mutually exclusive. If you demonstrate to your soldiers that you care for them professionally, you'll be liked. There's no question, because they know that you're there for them. And you don't, as it said there, you're not there to win a popularity contest. You're not there to be politically correct. You're there to accomplish your mission, but also make sure that your guys come back.
And I think I'm starting to tie together something very clearly in my head right now, and that is, your number 2 rule of leadership, which is caring. Mm-hmm. And I think if you care about your people and they see that you care about them, that trumps the fact that you want them to do things the right way, because the reason you want them to do the things the right way is because you care about them and it's going to keep them alive, make you successful.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a young officer, I at that time when I was a company after Hackworth left, we had another battalion commander come in, right, and he wrote on my OER. All my career, I had max OERs, really good stuff. But on this one, he wrote that, and I'll take this hit any day of the week. He said I was too concerned for my troops sometimes.
Wow.
And I said, okay, I'll take that.
Wow, that's a interesting perspective.
Yeah.
And this is one of those dichotomies as well. Because one of the hardest things about being a leader is obviously you care about your men so much, and yet you are going to do things. You are going to put them in situations that's going to put their lives at risk. And that is something that every leader has to, well, at least military leaders, they have to find a way to get a handle on that. Because you love your guys and you want to take care of them, but you do have to do your mission.
Yep.
And that's one of the hardest things to balance. Talking about the morality of war a little bit, this was and again, this is why, the story that I opened up with, you could see that one clearly had to do with having moral dilemmas and having guilt, because Hackworth gave a guy an order and the guy followed the order, maybe not the way Hackworth thought he was, but the moral injury that he got from that, he said, lasted his whole life of giving an order and somebody does something and you didn't expect to do them, they end up getting killed. It's one of his guys that he loved gets killed because of the way he led. Here's another kind of moral situation. Going back to the book, they're flying around, they're on a mission. We went down to about 100 feet. The suspects were still running, but this closer inspection confirmed my initial feeling. They were just 8 kids, no older than 13 or 14, simply scared shitless as they ran, looking for cover, carrying neither weapons nor military equipment. No, I told the pilot, I don't give you permission to fire. I'll put an infantry insert on them. I instructed the platoon leader, whose men were aboard the 4 Slicks, where to land. With gunships covering, the platoon hit the ground. They immediately received small arms fire and took a couple of wounded. The little kids were, as my savvy pilot had said from the outset, Viet Cong. It was a major lesson learned for me, but one impossible to etch in stone. I had a couple of men wounded who would not have been if I'd just said to blow those kids away. But I couldn't say blow them away because they appeared unarmed. Yes, they were VC, but they could just as well have been kids ditching school who happened to get caught in the crossfire. Anything was possible. And I suddenly realized it would not be easy, this Delta War. It wasn't easy to tell the good guys from the bad guys anywhere in South Vietnam, but here in the Delta, it was damn near impossible. Again, very similar to what my guys dealt with over in Ramadi. It was very hard to tell who was good and who was bad, and the enemy knew they could just drop the weapon and walk away, and now they were considered innocent, even though 20 seconds prior to that they were shooting. How did you keep your men from becoming so callous that they were just going to start shooting kids because they suspected they were VC? How hard did you have to keep control of that?
Well, my response to that is the American soldier innately is ethical. It's in our culture not to shoot women and children. Now, guys, if they're, that might be something else, but we do not shoot civilians just who are caught with, we run across them just because they're there and we want to take revenge. We don't do that as an army, generally speaking. Now, there are times when people lose it, and I understand that. That's the stress of war. That's happened in all wars. I don't condone it, but I can understand. And so to answer your question, we really didn't have to. Our guys were pretty professional, and I was proud to serve with them. I didn't see any of that. Okay.
Yeah, and this just tells me once again it's about leadership. I mean, because here you can see Hack clearly leaning towards making sure he's doing the right thing. Even though he's a guy that loves his troops and wants to take care of them, he still leans towards doing the right thing. And from what you're saying, that filtered all the way through the chain of command. And we took an in-depth look. I've actually done 2 podcasts concerning the My Lai massacre and what happened there. And it was just so clear that the leadership was completely at fault, and the way that they led those troops. And it was when I went through to try and pull something positive out of the My Lai massacre, the positive message that I got from it was that it was one officer who had flown. It was Thompson, I believe his name was, but he had flown over. He'd seen what was happening. He flew back to base, told the senior leadership, this is what's going on the ground. The senior leadership radioed into the field and said, stop killing people. And they literally instantly stopped. They stopped the massacre just because a leader stepped up and said stop. So good leadership completely changed the situation as it was ongoing. And clearly, if there would have been a better leader on the ground that was leading in the right way, it never would have even started. So you can see here from what Hack's saying, the way he led and the way he treated unknown people, and then the way that was carried out through the whole battalion. That's another amazing testament to good leadership.
Yeah, and one thing about My Lai, which I tell people, is that it was the exception that proved the rule. That the United States military, that was an exception.
Oh yeah, yep.
The rule in our military is we don't do that, and that proved it. I mean, I didn't see, there were other armies there who were more ruthless, like the ROKs. The ROKs were not there. The Republic of Korea, they were not there to win the hearts and minds of the people. They were there to win the war. So if they would go by a village and they were fired upon, they'd destroy the village. And after a while, nobody fired on the ROKs.
When Hackworth now he got wounded an 8th time.
Yeah,
that was while you were there.
I thought you were getting to that when you read that one quote. But now I wasn't there with him when he got his 8th Purple Heart, but I know the story, and basically there were guys who were in bad shape, and he lands his CNC in the middle of in fact that might have been it, and maybe they landed it in the middle of a firefight, or Hack did. He ordered the pilot to take him down, and he does put the wounded guys into the CNC. Well, the CNC isn't that big. There's no room for Hack. So he stands on the skids, and they take off, and he gets hit in the leg. And that was his 8th Purple Heart. Well, after that, he could tell the guys in the battalion, I want you to walk through this wall of fire, and the response would be, where do you want us to go? He led by example.
But is that what caused the Army to say, okay, we're going to... Did they pull him from the battalion at that point when he got his 8th Purple Heart? Yeah,
pretty much. That was it.
Because if you got 3 Purple Hearts, you went home? Was that the deal?
I don't know. I only had 1, so I have no idea. But they basically said, we can't afford to lose you. I mean, if they, if you get killed, I mean that's a big hit on just the morale, and so you're out of there in the field. Okay. So he went up to Pleiku to become the deputy. He was the G3 Corps advisor for 2 Corps, okay, which was the Central Highlands. And when my company was pulled out of Vietnam and I refused to go, I said, hey, I want to stay here. I called Hack, And I said, "Sir, I don't really want to go back. Can you use me?" I had orders the next day to go to play coup.